Hi, everybody. How's it, Peter? How are you?
Hi, Nico. Well, and you?
Lekker, thank you. A little bit traumatized, having my own little things going, so I think it's the perfect topic. So this is radical self-responsibility for those who haven't seen us yet. Welcome back to those who've been before. And today we're going to talk about addressing one of the spokes of our RSR umbrella, which is specifically topic entitled Healing Trauma. So, Pete, you're going to kick off. This is your professional department. And you're going to, I suppose, start with what is trauma?
Sure. So, wow, this is my professional department because I'm healing from trauma. So, um, and I always go to Gabor Mate's definition of the fact that, and Peter Levine and Gabor Mate both say trauma isn't what happened to us. Trauma is how what happened to us affects us in our lives on a daily basis. And there are two types of trauma. There's what Gabor Mate calls big T trauma, which is sexual abuse, physical abuse, that kind of thing. Particularly, when we're looking at childhood, particularly, and then also, then he defines little T trauma, which is the abandonment issues, the things that should have happened that didn't happen. So my experience is that a lot of people deal with big T trauma, and everybody deals with little T trauma. So we all are in some way in recovery from small T trauma or abandonment issues in our childhood. Everybody deals with feelings of not good enough. Everybody deals with feeling somehow that they fall short and that there's an empty void in their lives, and they don't know how to fill it. So when I look at my own path of healing trauma, and how did I know that I had trauma? Well, I just couldn't cope with life. And my sister always says to me, "Don't tell your story." It's like it's dramatic. But I think that I share my story because to a large degree, it's the only thing I have to work with. That's my experience. And I remember when I was in starting in recovery from addiction, that I listened to somebody sharing about their heroin addiction, and I was certainly nowhere near there. But what my response to that share was, well, if she can do it, so can I. She can pull herself out of a heroin addiction. I can pull myself out of my small addictions. So how did I know I was traumatized? I dealt with perfectionism issues. I dealt with procrastination. I dealt with depression and anxiety in my teenage years. And then, oh my goodness me, for some unknown reason, and of course there were signs and everything, but when I was 19, I tried to commit suicide, and everybody was like totally flabbergasted and baffled. And I suffered with addiction issues in my 20s, and just not being able to settle to anything, and just always this feeling that something was wrong, that I needed, that something was just not right, and I didn't know how to sort it out. So I mean, the experience of ADD, all the substance use disorder, emotional addictions, shopping, gambling, sex and love addiction, all the things that we can use to avoid pain can be addictions. And if we're using things to avoid pain, then that is a symptom of some kind of early childhood trauma. And when one looks at, like, if I look at my childhood, and the picture that I had of it was that I came from a normal dysfunctional family. I used to say a normal family, and then later on I added normal dysfunctional family. I went to lovely schools. I was looked after nutritionally, and I lived in a safe home and all of those things. And yet I suffered with this depression and anxiety, and later on I realized eating disorder as well, and all of these things. So and I tried to deal with it in various ways through my life. I looked for things to fill that hole. In my 20s, it was alcohol and drugs. In my 30s, it was a family. I got married and had children and still unhappy. I got involved in Buddhism, and I studied very deeply. And although I managed to learn to maintain some kind of equanimity in my life, there was still always this underlying feeling that somehow, something, somewhere was so very wrong. So, and then later on, I got divorced. My marriage was abusive. I got divorced. And then I really started on my healing journey, which took me in all sorts of different directions, and then back into rehab and having to really look at what my pain was, and during that time uncovering a lot of stuff. And it turns out that my mother was extremely unstable, and that I was getting severe hidings from the age of 2, and that I was the scapegoat for the family. And all of that not good enough stuff is what became my severe trauma. This feeling always that somehow I needed something outside of myself to make me okay. And so that's the work I do now, is helping people to become their own inner parent, because we can't get what we need, unconditional love. We can't get that from our human parents, because it's just not possible. But we can. They are human and traumatized people, but we can give it to ourselves, and become our own inner parent. So that's the work I do, is helping people to attach securely to themselves so that they can let their childhood trauma go, and this impossible dream that the perfect parents will arrive if we just cut and paste ourselves in just the right way. And that's the trauma that most people deal with on a daily basis.
Sure. Yes. So in effect, to tackle one's trauma, identify and start healing it, is a radically self-responsible thing to do, which one does for yourself. And once again, as we said in our intro to radical self-responsibility, in our intro video, it does have a very amazing spillover effect into the collective. When you work on it personally, individually, that's our huge responsibility. Know thyself, work with thyself, and the traumas that distract us from knowing and hiding that true self, and from us being unable to express our true selves, to be, when we get there, it does spill over, like as in parenting, a perfect example. And we will be less inclined to then, by default or unconscious behaviors, traumatize our children and those we work with and come across.
Absolutely. And I traumatized my kids, and mainly because I wasn't able to be emotionally present, and in healing my own trauma, I am now able to be more present for my children, because that's really my trauma, is the disconnect from my mother, right? That disconnect from the person that's supposed to keep you completely safe and be there for you and all of those things, that complete disconnect from that person. So, and it's hard to face the fact that, you know, I had such a traumatic childhood, and then I wanted to make sure that my children never went through that, and inadvertently ended up doing exactly the same thing to them that my mother did to me, because not with the unhealed trauma, I was triggered by my children. I wasn't able to be emotionally present, and so healing that is, you know, facing that I did that, and that my kids now walk around with the same wound was difficult. It was really difficult. But somebody said to me, one of my many people that's helped me over the years, said it doesn't matter what's gone before. What matters is what you do from now on. We're not responsible for the things that happen to us as children, but we are responsible for healing our trauma in the present, you know. And most people find it very difficult to face, you know, because we have the sneaking suspicion that this healing, this trauma, like doing this thing, we have the sneaking suspicion that actually, if we look, we're going to find out that we really are terrible, bad, awful people, monsters. You know, those things that we keep hidden in a cupboard, and we lock the door and we don't ever let them out, you know. In internal family systems, they call that the exile part. We push it away, and we don't ever want to look, because that's the part of us that deserves all the horrible, bad stuff that happened to us, you know. But when one actually starts looking and lets it all out, actually, it's like the Gruffalo's child. I don't know if you know the Gruffalo, if you know that story. There's this huge big Gruffalo with fiery eyes and dripping teeth and big horns, etc., etc. And when they actually find it's a little mouse like this. And so embracing the part of me that I feel is a monster, and facing that part of me actually is what is the shadow work. It is the it is the key to discovering that actually everything about me is actually acceptable and lovable, because that then is my, you know, has been my trauma always, of feeling that nothing I do will ever be good enough.
So, I mean, that Gruffalo story, it's the Taming the Dragon story, isn't it?
It is.
It's the classic, you know, version of that. So, Pete, I'm going to go back to the big T. Okay, so we were talking about that and like heavy stuff like sexual abuse, etc. What about, I know Gabor Mate speaks about, he grew up in the Holocaust. In fact, his first years were right there. People around him were taking off to, you know, the notorious showers and all of those places. And people were just being like grandparents and these people. And then eventually his mom and him were traumatized. They were going to go off somewhere, and she handed him over to a complete stranger to save his life. And interestingly enough, even though that was a saving gesture, the baby that he was then still interprets that as an abandonment. And so one should, because instinctively. So even though the parent meant 100% well, obviously, that is still the experience. What went on is one thing, but how, as you said, the feeling of that and then sits in the body. And of course, the body eventually expresses that as an illness or a dis-ease.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about diseases. I mean, I'm sure you've had some cases, maybe in your personal experience or in the clients that you work with, who people have actually healed physically from certain things when they have looked at their trauma and cleared issues there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can use my own example, you know. I lived with eczema all of my life. I developed systemic eczema when I was 3 months old. I also had, you know, the classic irritable bowel syndrome in my 20s. And trying to think what other stuff have I healed, but those are the two main ones, you know. And gut issues are always about childhood trauma, you know. Guts and joint as well, joint stuff about not being good enough, you know. and it always comes with the joint stuff, always comes with people who are so nice, you know, because that's how they've learned to stay attached to everybody else, is to be a people pleaser, actually. And then not to look after themselves. So that always feeling not good enough and always needing to do for other instead of do for self.
Yes.
And the boundary issues come into that as well. With the eczema that I carried from childhood right through into my 40s, actually, it was healed when I put a serious boundary in with my mom and my sisters, and actually had a 4-year break of no contact with them at all. And in that time, all my skin issues actually healed, because I didn't just have the eczema, but other as well. So, and yes, plenty of things that I've seen along the way, where because we have a body mind, right? The mind pervades the body. They are not separate. And so our state of mind is always affecting how we embody in our bodies. And I mean, Gabor Mate's latest book, The Myth of Normal, is just all about that, is how our environment affects us. That it's not genetics, it's actually epigenetics. It's the environment that we find ourselves in. And if it's a socially hostile environment, we are going to be affected by that. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes.
The disease?
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
and then of course, addictions are also a dis-ease, you know. It's a dis-ease in the mind, and is disease the right word? Actually, it's a normal response to being in pain, suffering, mental suffering, you know, that we want to try and shift that pain, because it's too much. And Gabor Mate says, instead of asking why the addiction, we should rather ask why the pain, you know. Where does the pain come from? And if so my approach is one of radical self-responsibility with the people that I work with. I can't do anything, but what I can do is give people information, because that was my experience, is that when I had the correct information, finally I could put everything in place and understand why I feel the way I do, and how then to change my inner conversation. And I mean, we've heard these things over and over again through the years, but for whatever reason, my particular way of explaining it at the moment works for some people, it doesn't work for others. But that's what I'm doing, is I'm educating people, helping them to understand the physiology of their bodies, the physiology of trauma, and how that affects them in their daily lives, and how to manage it, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've heard guys, Gabor Mate, he actually mentions that MS and rheumatoid arthritis, those immune deficiency problems, those big ones, are very much directly related to trauma, because doctors always at the physical level look at it and they actually can't find things wrong. They don't really know what causes MS, you know, they're all abstract about it. So all they're doing is putting plasters on, medicating, scratching their heads and saying, well, this is an incurable disease. And obviously the patients go with it. But actually, even going back further, like cancer and that, or any of these diseases, going to a doctor and the doctor says, this is what you have been, you know, this is what you've got. That in itself is a very huge trauma. Absolutely. And that will take that person into another down road. So to get their own minds back and to make radically self-responsible decisions about who they really are And should they listen to this guy's take on who that guy thinks they are, which of course all of us do, well, most of us anyway, we've been trained that we transfer and outsource others who we think are experts' opinions about what's going on with us, or how we should educate our children, or how we should medicate, or any of those things. And if you can go deep,
when you talk about this stuff, Nico, the thing that just keeps going on round and round in my head was when I was studying Buddhism in the 2000s. What I came to understand if that there are causes and effects. Okay, this is the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. These things are there. If something is a true cause of a disease, then everybody who uses that thing will get that disease. Every single person without exception. Okay, but the fact is that it's never so. So there is no true cause of a disease, because then it would mean that so I remember deodorant, antiperspirant deodorant under your arms being cited as a cause for breast cancer at some time, But fuck no, because if everybody who used antiperspirant deodorant got cancer, then you could say that it was a true cause, We know plenty of people who smoke till they 90 and don't die of smoking. Do you know what I mean? So it's not a true cause of what's going on. So then what do you, like what Gabor Mate is talking about in the myth of normal, is looking at the states of mind that are common to all these, the psychological states of mind that are common to all these diseases. And those are more predictive of what kind of physical symptoms one might experience, So I found that fascinating.
It is beautiful because it's going deeper, and it's revealing again and putting it the right way up, as above, so below, that the primary cause is consciousness and what is going on in the mind. And if you're not conscious of what's going on in consciousness, that it can have a default trigger on the emotions, which then becomes and is expressed in the body and the physiology, which can be a dis-ease or an ease. And also he cites there, which I know I've always gone with and experienced in myself, that happiness is an extremely healthy way of being. But I'm talking about true happiness, not fakery happiness, not being nice, being real, but finding the joy. And again, for me, my thing is always nature. Whenever I go in nature, it is a joyful experience. And people know that because nature was here before me. Nature will always be here. Nature is what feeds us, etc. And that's why it is a very beautiful place. Never mind the color green that our heart chakra, where we'd like to go in the center, the middle path, responds to. So yes, and being taken out of, I think in your interview with me, in our Radical Responsibility channel, I also speak about being put into a classroom, a cold stone place, well, cement place, whatever, out of nature, which was my play place, Absolutely. So that can also traumatize people, this whole. And what about the pandemic? I mean, the lockdowns, that must have been incredibly traumatic for the whole globe, for all the humans, the collective.
So now we're starting to talk about trauma-based mind control, right?
Yes.
Okay, so do we want to go to the physiological effects of trauma and what happens in the brain? Do we want to go there?
Yes. Let's go there. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
So then we have to talk about the triune brain, okay? And I always describe it like this: if my arm is my spine, then the heel of my hand is my brain stem, what's also known as the reptilian brain or the R complex, okay? And that part of my brain is responsible for all the autonomic nervous system things that go on in the brain, okay? Then over that, we get the limbic system, which is represented here by my thumb, okay? And the limbic system is also known as the mammalian brain, and that is where all the feeling part of us is situated in the limbic system. All the glands, the pituitary gland and the can't remember what the other one's called, that are responsible for the hormones that make us feel the way we do. And then over that comes the my fingers, which now represent the neocortex, which is the part of our brain that does all the thinking. It's logical, etc., etc., and it's the part of us that makes meaning. Okay, that creates meaning and purpose in life. That's the part of us that does the thinking. Now, what happens when we are activated into fight or flight is the neocortex disconnects, so we can't think. Okay, and the R complex takes over, and it automatically a whole bunch of things happen in our body. Okay, blood's pushed to the limbs so that we can either fight or run. The digestion slows down because no blood is sent there, and we are supposed to be able to regulate in and out of that state. Okay, if we get traumatized over and over again, as with complex post-traumatic stress disorder or behavioral, what they also call behavioral post-traumatic stress disorder, which is from childhood trauma, then we get stuck in this R complex, and people then go into the state of freeze, okay, of overwhelm and freeze, and then there's all the numbness and the hopelessness, and that's where depression and anxiety live, okay, and actually a pre-death state. The clue is that when we are stressed and traumatized, our neocortex disconnects and we can't think. Okay, so people who have been through trauma and are stuck in this bottom, in the R complex, can't make very good decisions. They might, so my own example is if somebody asks me, what do you want, this or that, or puts me on the spot, I immediately get deer in the headlights, you know, I freeze and I don't know what to do. And I've learned to manage that, but it lives there to some degree all the time. And if I don't take care of myself from the point of view of making sure that I'm properly fed, we call it hungry, angry, lonely, tired, halt. If I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, I need to withdraw and take care of my basic needs. Because what happens is, if any of those needs are not met, then I'm in a stressed state. And because I suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder, I automatically and then disconnected and living out of the past, because the R complex can only operate out of the past, right? It's looking at we call the reticular activating system, the RAS, is always trying to look through past experiences to see if we've had an experience like this before to keep us safe, right? And if it finds a past experience and it finds a neural pathway, it just fires down there, and we find ourselves in old patterns. So this is why looking after all our basic needs and making sure those are met is so important on a daily basis. And then this is where the trauma-based mind control comes in, because if you can stress the whole planet out, by disconnecting them isolating them from the people they love, creating a fear that one can't do anything about because you can't see it. So there's no action that's possible to take, and creating this deep fear, it puts everybody into reactivity instead of response, and the neocortex just goes offline, and people who are in that state are easily controlled.
There's no rational thinking about it. There's no clear thinking.
No, and you're just going for whatever you think is going to keep you safe. So hence everybody was quite happy to just stay at home and not go out there and face some unknown thing that you can't even see, you know, which
Mhm.
is one of the reasons that viruses are such a handy thing for the medical establishment, because you can't see them, you know.
Yeah, exactly. The
So
monster in the cupboard. Yeah.
yeah, and you know, the natural health perspective, and not even the natural health perspective, but the alternative medical view, that it's not that it's germ theory, it's the germ that causes the disease. It's not actually, it's the state of the being that causes. It's the terrain is everything. So if you're stressed out by not eating properly, then you're going to be susceptible to the things that are in the air all the time, and then manifest whatever things. And you know, so if we have this disconnect between germ theory, which is very convenient for the medical establishment because it means they can prescribe all sorts of things. Did we want to go here? But yeah, because the medical system is traumatizing as well, you know. It traumatizes us right from the day we are born until the day we die, and it medicalizes everything and takes us out of nature. So and viruses are very convenient for these people because nobody can see them, you know.
And
And
when they
I
give,
say,
yeah.
they say that they've seen them under microscopes, etc., etc. But what are they really that they're seeing under microscopes? I mean, there are plenty of natural health people who will say that in certain circumstances, people will exude exosomes. It's a detox thing from our bodies. And when I start exuding those exosomes, the pheromonally around me, people around me will start exuding them as well. Oh, here's a detox is necessary. Same way that that the acacia trees that are starting to be eaten by a giraffe will send messages to the other acacia trees, and then they'll produce things that the giraffes are bitter for the giraffes, so they don't, you know, eat all of the trees in the area. So yeah, it's a very easy way to stress people out, is to threaten them with something they can't see or do anything about, you know, because that's the one thing that mitigates fight or flight, the state of fight or flight, is being able to do something about the threat. We are, you know, we mobilized in that moment into fight or flight so that we can defend ourselves or run away from what's going on, you know. And if one isn't able to do that, then left with all these stress hormones in the body that go nowhere, that were meant to mean, you know, that we could run away from something. And to deactivate out of that state is without actually having taken an action is quite something. So when we then get stuck in that state of permanent fear, you know.
Absolutely. And the image comes up for me, we become like jumpy and easy to trigger. So anything will distract us, because we've got all this pent up energy, we were supposed to run away or climb a tree from this monster coming to eat us, or this jaguar or whatever from way back. You know, now there's no jaguar, but there's this unseen thing. I mean, I was going to add that, I mean, the medical association, doctors, whatever, also very good at when they give you prescriptions for this unseen thing, they write in like this secret language, you know, and you're like, you walk with this, but you have no idea what this priest has been telling you or knows. It's this whole occultic, dark thing, secret language, and you take it to the chemist, and they're like, somehow decipher it, and they're like, wow, these people must be powerful, you know, they're like special, so they must know something you don't. So yeah, you'll just trust them. So you completely outsource your body's innate connection to nature. Nature's never out to get you. It's doing all these beautiful things in the different rhythms, same as weeds, you know, everybody pulls out all the weeds and plants all their shit in a row. No, it's all there for a very good purpose, to regenerate the soil in different times and different places.
Yeah, absolutely. And the body's innate knowing of how to heal is so is such an amazing thing, you know. I mean, one of the things that happens when one is threatened is afterwards you feel shaky, you know. there's that shakiness, and the tears want to come, and the shaking is really important because it actually shakes out those stress hormones and shakes and is really completing the process that the body was mobilized for. And then tears as well, they've analyzed tears, and after a fright like that, the tears have got stress hormones in them. It's an excretory process. So people who can't cry, a part of their body is not actually excreting stress hormones properly, Our body has thought of everything, somehow. And so when we shut that automatic response down, that shaking response, and we feed people sugar water to stop them shaking and all of that, instead of actually allowing that this is a process that needs to happen, that all of that gets stuck in the body, and then it's got to come out somehow. That's why people run and exercise to deal with stress, because it's all that adrenaline that has to come out of the body. We all find ways of dealing with it, but the stresses that we're dealing with now, that our society has kind of been engineered into, are no longer things that we can actually do anything like take a physical action in your life to deal with the threat. It's very cleverly engineered so that there's nothing we can do, and it's this ever-present boogeyman of a virus or aliens or what did we start with? The terrorism, in weapons of mass destruction, with all these things that we actually can't do anything about, but they're this threat that is going to end the world, and it keeps everybody in the state of constant stress, so that there is no capacity, consciousness to do anything about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, I mean, my mind, obviously, being my area, I focus on daily education, a classroom. It is the most unnatural environment, and the kids have to sit down, so they can never process in their physical body until 2-3 hours later the trauma that they experience of being literally locked down in the four walls so unnaturally, because also the outside environment is distracting. It's where you daydream. It's where you're not doing schoolwork, so you're actually not doing anything purposeful according to this standard, and therefore we have the same experience that we carry with us, never letting it out, always suppressed by other, and we call this discipline. Yeah, well, it's basically what you're being controlled and being told what to do, and instruction is not learning whatsoever. There's no need to know any of that, but you are being told that that's what you must know, and your only point and reason for being there is to be able to parrot back those so-called facts or information. And other than that, it's got no purpose outside the classroom that you know of. Yet you've been told mysteriously that you're going to find a job and you're going to be a good soldier, order follower, and you think, okay, this is how it should be. Because again, you can't go higher than which I call the crocodile brain, the archon, and you will just stay in that place. And it's always, okay, so I'm going to just have a 9-to-5 job and work real hard to survive, and do my best, whether I like it or not. It is the way of the world. So when it's a lockdown pandemic talk, it's just, here's just another big classroom. We have to be staying in the classroom again. We can't go out. It's dangerous out there,
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I get new kids in here, and it's like everything to them is a danger. Is there a bee? Is there a thing? I'm like, wow, dude, these are all actually your friends. Exactly like the trauma inside of us. This the mouse. It's not this bee guy, in the big movies of, it's gonna come with a stinger.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is your buddy. In fact, if he stings you, it's a good thing. It's your doctor. He wants to help you, with inflammation or whatever the case might be.
And when I look around me, I just see, I grew up with a neurotic mother. And so that means that I was afraid as well, thank goodness my children went to Waldorf, because if they'd stayed, if they'd been in mainstream or they'd stayed at home with me, my fears would have been transferred. I think they were to some degree anyway, but it would have been even worse, and that's what I see all around me is all of these children who've been conditioned into living out from fear because their parents are stuck in fear. And that's and that is the process that we have to go through now, is to heal that trauma, because we get stuck, we get stuck in the control system of the R complex, or the neocortex is also divided left and right brain, and then we get stuck either in the absolute analytical of the left brain or the absolute watery compassion, intuition, creativity of the right brain, and those two have got to be balanced. That's the classic divine feminine and divine masculine that we have to be balancing and learning to balance all the time. The feminine principle being the non-aggression principle, and the masculine principle being the right to self-defense, having clear boundaries and knowing how to engage the warrior archetype inside of us, and be able to put healthy boundaries in place. That's the divine masculine. And then the divine feminine, of course, is caring. And if we have been traumatized to the point where we've disconnected so completely that we actually don't even know what we're feeling, we just live from here up, then there is no care. We're stuck in this stimulus response place of the R complex, and there is no care about ourselves or anybody around. So it's to heal so that we can reconnect all of those things, so that we can be at integrity, where we know what we're feeling in our bodies. That information is being fed to the R complex, but also through the limbic system. And so we can name what's going on for us and place it in our bodies, and then be able to communicate about it, so that we become an integrous being, so that what we perceive, feel, think, and say are all the same.
And that comes out in our action in a conscious way, not in an unconscious. Right.
And this is what authenticity is. Authenticity is that if I feel it, I'm able to express it in a way that doesn't hurt anybody else or myself, so if I am irritated by something that somebody else does, I can look at myself and say, sure, there's a boundary crossing there somewhere. Either I don't have clear enough boundaries, or this person is violating my space, or my experience of myself in some way, treating me with disrespect or whatever, and I need to have clear boundaries. Does that mean that I need to remove myself from the situation? Or does it mean that I have to communicate with this other person, and I can say, when you did X, Y, Z, I felt disrespected, and put that out there. This is what I felt. I'm telling you, not in a nasty way, but I'm telling you how I felt, so that you can respond. And then if you don't, I'll bring the boundary back to myself, and I'll make sure that I'm not in your presence that often. And that's the clarity of self-defense. So in learning, so Gabor Mate again talks about these two competing needs that we have as children. They're both survival needs. The one is the attachment need, and the other is the need for full authentic expression of self. Okay. But the attachment need always wins, because we know as kids that we can't survive without the big ones, right? The parents are the ones that bring the food and the clothes, etc., etc. We know subconsciously that without them we can't survive. So attachment always trumps the full authentic expression of self. So we shut that down. The first time we express ourselves authentically, and usually around about to when the rage hits, in the temper tantrums, and we trigger our parents' shame and they shut us down, we learn that the full authentic expression of ourselves will not do for our parents. And so we shut it down. And the mechanism that shuts that down is guilt and shame, right? So we learn that who I am is too much, not good enough, and I've got to shut it down and cut and paste myself in order to stay attached to my parents, without whom I die. Okay, so that guilt and shame mechanism it's adaptive. In other words, it helps us survive. It's a really important thing. And we decide in that moment as children that actually we are the wrong ones. We can't do anything about our parents, but we can do something about ourselves. If we decide that our parents are the problem, we fucked, okay? But if we decide we're the problem, we can actually do something about it. So we decide that I'm gonna cut and paste myself. I know what I can do. I just won't be so, I won't express myself just in just that way. And we learn to cut and paste ourselves. And then eventually what happens is we're living a half-life. And unless we actually learn about this mechanism and learn to say, thank you, guilt and shame, but I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I'm going to be who I am, regardless. This is the depression of living a life half-lived, right? And so this is absolutely essential for each one of us we all go through this process, but for each one of us, it's an essential process of reclaiming ourselves from our childhood, going back and fetching that little alive child who decided that they had to shut themselves down. Fetch that child, integrate it, and actually understand where all these feelings come from, so that we can we can live a full, authentic expression of ourselves into our lives, because that's what we came here to do.
Absolutely. So it keeps on coming and have a mirror for me in actual relationships as we grow up and get boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, or whatever partnerships happening, intimate in particular, and then both either one or the other not expressing themselves fully because the same thing. It's not welcome here. It's going to upset the balance because I'm attached to this person. After all, they complete me. Or for the kids' sake, I've got to stay in this relationship, And I'm also obviously coming from personal experience of it. And therefore, we feel mildly depressed, or if maybe not even worse depressed, more intensely depressed, suicidal, but life half lived. But okay, there's at least the other person can be the other half that lives it for us, So we feel, okay, this is a complete. So when we without, we lonely, and we kind of, okay, there's company, but hell, as long as I don't speak my mind completely or be myself fully, whether in the bedroom, public space, whatever, let me just do my, bringing in whatever, the bread, and keep the pot boiling. So I just do what needs doing, and I stay in my crocodile bread. I'm and a half person. And I think most people are literally there,
Yeah, and there's another layer to that as well, Nico, is that if we have done the healing work and the work of becoming our own inner parent, then we can be in relationship where we're not looking for a parent in the person. We're not looking to complete ourselves. We're not looking for our validation in the other person. We've become securely self-attached to ourselves. So then in relationship with the other person, my own experience is that I was always wanting to cut and paste my partner because they reflect on me, and in the process of coming to this place of having attached to myself and not needing external validation anymore, it doesn't matter. what my partner does. It doesn't matter how he presents himself, because I'm secure in myself. And here's a person that I enjoy spending time with. And if you don't happen to think he's a wonderful guy the same way I do, well, we all have different tastes, you know. But we have this thing where we are incomplete. We are still trying to look for that the impossible dream of the perfect mother or the perfect father, and to find that validation from the outside instead of sourcing it from within ourselves. And then you get into relationship, and that's when it's codependent relationship. So my own experience is that as I've done this healing work, I haven't really had to work on the relationships that much. The relationships have cleared up by themselves.
Yes.
It's been a fascinating journey.
That is beautiful. Exactly that. So healing the self is not a self-indulgent exercise.
No.
It's a bloody necessary for self and for the whole. It is so necessary.
In fact, it is the most important thing that we can do in relationship with in our relationships with anybody. I read this Jungian book on relationship once, and I can't remember the author, etc., etc. But the thing that I remember, sometimes there's only one line I take out of a book, and this line was, our entire job in any relationship in our lives is to take back our projections. That's our job, because we can't be in relationship with other people when we are projecting our stuff outwards. Then all I am in relationship with is my projections. So I have a fear of being too much. So I project onto my partner that he can't handle a loud woman, you know, and I keep myself small, and I blame it on my partner that he can't handle loud women, and so I continue to cut and paste myself. But it's my projection, because if I take back my projection and I am fully myself, my experience has been that most people around me have been able to be, because I'm being authentic, are happy to experience me in that way, you know. So, and this is particularly with our children as well. I project my own childhood trauma onto my children, these poor children who have experienced all of this stuff, instead of, and you know, that what I was really doing was still trying to rescue my inner child. And having dealt with my inner child and become my own inner parent, in other words, being able to acknowledge and validate the feelings that all the different parts of me have and validate them for myself, all of a sudden, my relationship with my kids has cleared up, because I'm not looking at them as victims to their childhood anymore. I'm holding them in a place of, well, this is what you've got to deal with, you know, and each of us has got our stuff and we deal with it. And so they become more self-responsible, because I'm not treating them like victims.
Very important.
And so our entire job in relationship is to take back our projections. And we can't do that if we aren't examining ourselves, if we aren't looking inwards. And I know that this is not what Narcotics Anonymous and all the anonymous programs would say, okay? There they want to say, I don't care how you're feeling, I want to see what you're doing, you know? And they talk about pity parties and all of that kind of stuff, because the people that go into those programs are the sickest people on the planet, by the way. And me, I've been there, so I know I can claim it, you know, sickest people on the planet, and are wallowing in their victimhood, which is why people in those fellowships might say things like, I don't want to know what you're feeling, I want to know what you're doing, because they are immobilized by their feelings. Okay. So feelings are important, and so is how we acting in life. And of course we don't want to have a pity party, but self-examination is not self-indulgent. It is absolutely critical to understand why certain people trigger me in certain ways. It is absolutely critical to understand why I always get angry when my daughter behaves in a particular way, because it's never about her and it's always about me. So if I want to have clear relationships with my children, I better know myself really well. And yeah, I can talk forever about that. So, but that's the basic that's the basic reason why we need to heal ourselves, so that we can have balanced relationships. And healing ourselves is not a self-indulgent thing.
So here's the scary part about healing ourselves. When I become whole and therefore not parasitical or needy anymore upon another to complete me, or for me to project my stuff onto and be conveniently another a evil person that I can throw, a devil or whatever imaginary monster, instead of just my friend the mouse, they might also run away. And you said that mostly it is when I heal myself, everything around me starts healing. Part of healing is sometimes that some things and some people need to go away because they're no longer, part of your reference, and you're going to have to keep adapting and chopping off bits of yourself to stay in that place.
It's so interesting, Nico, that as we heal and we start to get healthy boundaries, the codependent people in our lives start to shout about how abusive we are and how terrible we are, etc., because the boundaries don't suit them. What the codependent people in our lives, these toxic relationships that we have engaged in from our unhealed place, it's no one person's fault, but as the one person starts to heal and put clear boundaries in place, the other person starts to get panicky because they've been drawing energy from this person. And as we get clear boundaries and we no longer allow that energy drain to the other person, they can get quite nasty. It can turn ugly. And we see it happen all around us in relationships when one person starts to heal, and then it's all the finger pointing, etc.
Which is beautiful also to put oneself in the other's shoes, because I can also be in that place. And in fact, I'm reflecting a lot right now that person is putting boundaries in place, and suddenly I'm left out. I'm not needed anymore in certain aspects to fill their bits, and I like to play into their victimhood, because then I feel like I'm healing. I'm actually their doctor, like puts me in an elevated position, so I can also I can play my power a little bit. Now I'm available, now I'm not, that hard to get kind of play that people have sometimes. That is, yeah, it's quite evil, actually. It's bloody evil. When we play each other like that, so when I can also respect when another comes, puts a boundary in place, I'm like, okay, they're looking at they are growing up, and now it's like teenagers shutting you out of their room or out of their life.
And Mark Passio talks about this as in the difference between inauthentic men and women and authentic men and women. Inauthentic men and women are looking to control or submit. Yes. They're looking either to control a submissive woman or to submit to a controlling woman, and vice versa. Whereas authentic or spiritually awakened men and women are not doing either of those things. It's not the control submit game anymore. Then we can meet each other equally, because we have a balanced masculine and feminine, and we don't need to control or submit to feel whole. And then,
that's our response. Yes.
Yeah, and then we are able to express ourselves authentically in our relationships as well, instead of playing this old men do this and women do that, and I'm going home to the ball and chain, and my husband wants too much sex, and the playing over these old collective consciousness patterns of these old toxic relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. In the authentic relationship, the stimulation and the vice versa inspiration to evolve and become even the better part of us, that we are meant to be constantly. That is the inspiration. The inauthentic one kind of drags down and puts down on a level, because it's that power, funny game going on, the control, being controlled, which goes on into the bedroom and all the other chutas that happen, absolutely every aspect, and then plays out obviously with the children who follow the demonstrated behavior patterns and then acts it out at school and bully stuff and and with the dog and weird stuff going on, and who become victims again of those who spot traumatized children and see, here we go, the trafficking, Joel, and all of that.
Absolutely.
And
it's so important, that Gabor Mate defines the trauma is actually the disconnect from the parent. When parents are not able to be emotionally present, and there may be many reasons, my sister nearly died when she was 3 months old. I was 17. I wasn't even a year and a half old. My mum went to hospital with my sister for 6 weeks. She was in an oxygen tent. First disconnect, Also, she went back to work when I was 3 months old. And so, it's these disconnects. And if we don't make sure that we're emotionally present, children are resilient and they can deal with these kinds of disconnects, but we have to reconnect with them. We have to make sure we're emotionally present. And this continual 80% of the time not emotionally present is a completely different thing. And it's the disconnect that kids feel that is the actual trauma. It's I thought when I went to boarding school that I was experiencing what they call homesickness, was actually this deep disconnect. Other kids didn't have the same thing. They didn't cry every day like I did. They had a better attachment with their parents, but I had an anxious attachment, and I didn't understand why I was crying so much. But it's that deep disconnect and feeling like not ever going to be part of a family again or whatever. No container for self, nothing to hold myself with because of this disconnect. Yeah. So, Nico, we are barreling on for time here. And I think it's probably a good place to start ending. What do you think?
I think so. No, that feels good. I think there was solid stuff in there. People can do with it what needs doing. And also, people can leave comments below. You can connect with Peta on our website. The details are on our YouTube channel. It's important when one feels a trigger, a calling, something you identify with and want to go there. This is the work that needs doing for all of us. And again, a disclaimer, none of us here know everything.
Absolutely.
And we like to learn from each other. We are here to learn from each other. This is what it's all about. That's the beauty of it. And we know what state the world is in. We've seen things come up into the light that are really, really can make us anxious, and trigger us. And if we're not ready for it, if we don't become the adults that we are meant to be, this can collapse in upon us. It can literally implode. And we can remain the victims on a much bigger, huger, global humanity
absolutely, Nico. And there are plenty plenty of coping tools that can be taught and learned, of ways of thinking, ways of being, things that can be done to ground ourselves, to mitigate the trauma, to manage the experience of the physiological experience of trauma in the body. And all of these things, you know, I've got hundreds of tools that I teach. And I teach these tools so that people can become so can take the responsibility for themselves. You know, I do not want clients for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I want clients for 6 months, help them get on with it. And then sometimes I have people who come back and say, I just want a quick session, there's something I'm dealing with or whatever, where they have one session and off they go again, you know. It's education.
Absolutely. Yeah. So on the education thing, for me, it's anybody not knowing what, how, or what in their life needs addressing. For me, sure clues are when you're not entirely happy, you're bullshitting yourself. So be radically self-responsible in being totally honest with yourself. Okay. Cut the BS. Then when I'm doing something, whether it's to earn money or doing service for somebody else, and it actually feels more like slavery, and I don't really want to do it anymore, but I'm just being nice, or I feel I'm programmed, I'm in it now, I have to do it anyway. There's boundary issues there, okay? That word no needs addressing, and that is trauma behavior. If you can't get out of it, doing something because you think you have to, whereas in reality, I always have a choice. Yeah. Look at that. How does that play out in my life? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Brilliant, Nico. Thanks so much. It's always so lucky to chat to you.
Thanks, Pete. Likewise. Mwah.
Mwah. Cheerio.
Cheers, everybody.